President Faults, members of the Harvard Corporation and the Board of Overseers, members of the faculty, proud parents, and above all, graduates. The first thing I would like to say is thank you. Not only has Harvard given me an extraordinary honor, but the weeks of fear and nausea it has endured. And the thoughts of giving this commencement address have made me lose weight. A win-win situation. Now all I have to do is take deep breaths, swing at the red banners, and convince myself that I'm at the world's largest Gryffindor reunions. Delivering a commencement address is a great responsibility, or so I thought, until I cast my mind back to my own graduation. The commencement speaker that day was the distinguished British philosopher Baroness Mary Warnock. Reflecting on her speech has helped me enormously in writing this one, because it turns out that I can't remember a single word she said. This liberating discovery enables me to proceed without any fear that I might inadvertently influence you to abandon promising careers in business, the law, politics, for the giddy delights of becoming a gay wizard. You see, if you all remember in years to come in the gay wizard joke, I come to attach the Baroness Mary Warnock. Achievable goals, the first step to self-improvement. Actually, I have racked my mind hurt for what I ought to say to you today. I have asked myself what I wish I had known at my own graduation, and what important lessons I have learned in the 21 years. And that has inspired between that day and this. I have come up with two answers. One, this wonderful day when we are gathered together to celebrate your academic success, I have decided to talk to you about the benefits of failure. And as you stand on the threshold of what is sometimes called real life, I want to restore the crucial importance of imagination. These may seem quite exotic and paradoxical choices, but bear with me. Looking back at the 21-year-old that I was at graduation, it is slightly uncomfortable experience for the 42-year-old that has half of my lifetime ago. I was striking an easy balance between the ambition I had for myself and what those closest to me expected of me. I was convinced that the only thing I wanted to do, ever, was to write novels. However, my parents, both of whom came from parish and neither of whom had been to college, took the view that my overactive imagination was an amusing personal quirk that would never pay a mortgage or secure a pension. I know that the irony strikes with the force of a cartoon anvil now. So they hoped that I would take a vocational degree. I wanted to study English literature. A compromise was reached, and the respect satisfied nobody, and I went up to study modern languages. Hardly had my parents' car surrounded the corner at the end of the road that I ditched German scuffed down the classic corridor. I cannot remember telling my parents that I was studying classics. They might well have found out for the first time on graduation day. And of all the success of the planet, I think they would have been hard put to name one less useful than Greek mythology when it came to securing the keys to an executive bathroom. I would like to make it clear, in parenthesis, that I do not blame my parents for their points of view, their expiry date, on blaming your parents for steering you in the wrong direction. The moment you are old enough to take the wheel, responsibility lies with you. What is more, I cannot criticize my parents for hoping that I would never experience poverty. They had been poor themselves, and I have since been poor, and I quite agree with them. This is not an ennobling experience. Poverty entails fear and stress and sometimes depression. It means 1,000 petty humiliations and hardships. Climbing out of poverty by our own efforts. It is indeed something, but poverty itself is romanticized but only by fools. What I fear most of myself at your age was not poverty, but failure. At your age, in spite of the distinct lack of motivation at university, where I had spent far too long in the coffee bar reading stories and far too little time at lectures, I had a knack for passing examinations, and that for years had been a measure of success in my life. And that of my peers, I am not doing up to suppose that because you are young, gifted, and well educated, you have never known hardships or heartbreak. Talent and intelligence never yet inoculated anyone against the caprice of the face, and do not for a moment suppose that anyone here was to enjoy an existing of unruffled privilege and contentment. However, the fact that you are graduating from Harvard suggests that you are not very well acquainted with failure. You might be driven by the fear of failure quite as much as the desire for success. Indeed, your conception of failure might not be too far from the average person's idea of success. So how have you already know? Flow. Ultimately, we have all decided for ourselves what constitutes failures. But the world is quite eager to give you a set of criteria if you let it. So I think it's fair to say that if by any conventional measure, a mere 7 years after my graduation day, I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, alone parents, and as poor as it's possible to be in modern Britain, without being homeless. The fears that my parents had had for me, and had for myself, had both come to pass, and by every unusual standard I was the biggest failure I knew. Now I am going to stand here and tell you that failure is fun. The period of my life was a dark one, and had no idea there was going to be what the press has since represented as a failure tale resolution. I had no idea then how far the tunnel extended, and a long time any light at the end it was a hope, rather than a reality. So why do I talk about benefits of failure? Simply because a failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was. I began to direct all my energy into finishing the only art that mattered to me, and I really succeeded in anything else. I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena I believed in truly belongs. I was set free because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter whom I adored, and had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. You might never fail on the scale I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Failure gave me an inner security that I had never attained by passing examinations. Failure taught me things about myself that I could have learned to no other way. And I discovered that I had a strong will and more discipline than I had suspected. I also found out that I had friends whose value was truly above the price of rubies. The knowledge that you have emerged wiser and stronger from setbacks means that you are, even after securing your ability to survive. You will never truly know yourself of the trend or of relationship until you have to test it by adversity. Such knowledge is a true gift. For all it is painfully wrong, and it has been worth more than any qualification I ever earned. So, given a time turner, I would tell my 21-year-old self that a personal happiness lies in knowing that life is not a checklist of acquisition of or achievement. Your qualifications, your CV, are not your life, though you will meet many people of age and older who confuse the two. Life is difficult and complicated, and beyond anyone else, total control. And the humility to know that will enable you to survive its vicissitudes. Now, I might think that I chose my second theme, the importance of imagination, because of the part it plays in rebuilding my life. But that is not wholly so. Though I personally will defend the value of bedtime stories to my last grasp, I have learned to value imagination in a much broader sense. Imagination is not only the uniquely human capacity to envision that which is not, and therefore the fount of all invention and innovation. In its arguably most transformative and revelatory capacity, it is a power that enables us to empathize with humans, whose experiences we have never shared. One of the greatest formative experiences of my life precedes Harry Potter. Though it informed much subsequently wrote in those books, this revelation came into the form of one of my earliest day jobs, though I was slopping up writing story during my lunch hours and paid the rent in my early 20s. By working at the African Research Department and Amnesty International's headquarters in London. There in my little office, I read hastily scribbled letters smuggled out of totalitarian regimes and by friends and women who were risking imprisonment to inform the outside world of what was happening to them. I was photographed and who had disappeared without trace and to amnesty by their desperate families and friends. I read the testimony of torture victims and saw pictures of their injuries. I opened handwritten eyewitness accounts of summary trials and executions, kidnapping and rapes. Many of my co-workers were ex-political prisoners, people who had been displaced from their homes or fled into exile because they had the temerity to speak against their governments. Visitors to our offices included those who had come to give information, to try and find out what happens to those they had left behind. I shall never forget the African torture victim, a young man no older than I was at the time, who had become mentally ill after all he had endured in his homeland. He trembled uncontrollably as he spoke into the video camera about the brutality inflicted upon him. He was a foot taller than I was and seemed as Rachel as a child. I was given the job of escorting him back to the underground station afterwards, and this man whose life had been shattered by cruelty took my hand with exquisite courtesy and wished me future happiness. And as long as I live, I shall remember walking along an empty corridor and suddenly hearing from behind a closed door a scream of pain and horror such as I have never heard since. The door opens, and the researcher poked out her head and told me to run and to make a hot drink for a young man sitting with her. She had just had to give him the news that in retaliation for his outspokenness against his country regime, and his had been seized and executed. Every day of my working week in my early 20s, I was reminded how incredibly fortunate I was to live in a country with a democratically elected government with legal representation and public trial where the rights of everyone. Every day I saw more evidence about the evils humankind will inflict on their fellow humans to gain and or maintain power. I began to have nightmares, literal nightmares, about some of the things I saw, heard, and read. And yet I also learned more about human goodness. and Amnesty International than I had ever known before. Amnesty mobilizes thousands of people who never been tortured or imprisoned for their beliefs or acts on behalf of those who have. The power of human empathy leading to collective action save lives and frees prisoners. Ordinary people, whose personal well-being and security are assured, join together in huge numbers to save people and do not know they will never meet. The small participation in that process was one of the most humbling and inspiring experiences of my life. Unlike many other creatures on this planet, humans can learn and understand without having experienced. They can think themselves into other people's places. Of course, there is a power, like my brain of fictional magic. It is morally neutral. One might use such an ability to manipulate or control just as much as to understand or sympathize. And many prefer not to exercise their imagination at all. They choose to remain comfortably within the bounds of their own experience, never troubling to wonder how it would feel to have been born older than they are. They can refuse to hear screams, to peer inside cages. They can close their minds and hurt to any suffering that does not touch them personally. They can refuse to know. I might be tempted to envy people who can live that way, except that I do not think they have any fewer nightmares than I do. Choosing to live in narrow spaces leads to a form of mental agoraphobia that brings its own terrors. I think they would willfully imagine to see more monsters. They are often more afraid. What is more, those who choose not to empathize enable real monsters, for without ever committing an act or outright evil itself, it could collude with it through our own apathy. One of the many things I learned at the end out classes corridor down which I ventured at the age of 18 in search of something I could not then define was this, written by the great author Plutarch, that achieve inwardly and change our reality. It is an astonishing statement, and yet proven 1,000 times every day of our lives. It expresses in part our inescapable connection with the outside world, the fact that we touch other people's lives simply by existing. But how much more are you, Harvard graduates from 2008, likely to touch other people's lives? Your intelligence, your capacity for hard work, the education you have earned and received, give you unique status and unique responsibilities. Even your nationality sets you apart. The great majority of you belong to the world's only remaining superpower. The way you vote, the way you live, the way you protest. The pressure you bring to bear on our government had an impact way to beyond that is our privilege and your burden. You choose to use your status and influence and to raise your voice on behalf of those who have no voice. You choose to identify not only with the powerful but with the powerless. You retain the ability to imagine yourself into the lives of those who do not have your advantages. And it will not only be your proud families who celebrate your resistance, but thousands and millions of people whose reality you have helped change. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. I am nearly finished. I have the ones heard for you, which is something I actually had at 21. The friends with whom I sat on graduation day have been my friends for life. They are my children's godparents, the people to whom I've been able to turn in times of trouble. The people who have been kind enough to shield me and took my name for death's Easters. And then our graduation were bound by enormous affliction, our shared experience and of a time that could never come again, and of course, by the knowledge that we have certain photographic evidence that would be exceptionally valuable. And if any of us ran for Prime Minister, So today, I wish you nothing better than similar friendships. And tomorrow I hope that even if you remember not a single word of mine, you remember those of Seneca, another of those old Romans I met when I fled down the classes corridor in retreat from career ladders in search of ancient wisdom. It is a tale, so is life, as how long it is. But how good it is what matters. I wish you all very good lives. Thank you very much.